Welcome to Speak Sex. I am Eve Eurydice. I am Greek from the island of Lesbos, where the lesbians come from. I am a writer and artist on the theme of sex. I've written 3 books on female sexuality. I was a staff writer on Spin magazine and Gear magazine. I wrote the Sex Files column for years. I've been on talk shows, TV shows as a sex expert. I wrote a book published by Scribner, Satyricon USA, A Journey Through the American Sexual Frontier, and so on. I have worked on this theme of female sexuality, female objectification, and the dichotomy between our bodies and our minds that is kind of forced on us by our society as it exists now. The dichotomy between our hormones and our souls, and how to bridge it for my entire 20-some-odd year career. I'm interested in a non-binary sexuality, and the reason for this podcast, Speak Sex, is that I came up with this idea that at this moment in our written history, we find ourselves with this extraordinary gift as women of being able to name consent. We have earned the ability to say yes to sex. We, as far as I know, never had that before. And that is the crack in the wall. It's the little opening through patriarchy, through the density of patriarchy, that gives us speech, gives us the opportunity to not only agree verbally through consent to sex, but then keep going from there and naming our desire, naming what we like, what we don't like, what our limits are, what our fantasies are, what we think about when we are alone in bed, as free as we can be, just with ourselves. Putting in words what we have been taught is unspeakable and shameful and secret and deeply private. And because it's been described as such, it hasn't been pre-articulated by the system, by our laws, our religions, our neighbors, our parents, our teachers. It's just ours for the naming. And that's why I suggest and encourage everyone to rethink the practice of speaking sex and negotiating the sexual experience step by step in order to reclaim that freedom for women and men by extension, because women-generated sexuality, if followed all the way in its practice, will eventually free men from their own burdens of monetizing, providing, competing, conquering, and the ultimate burden of not being able to be vulnerable and soft and take and be passive in sex, which is, I think, very difficult for the male gender. Okay, so that's my basic explanation of this podcast. There is an introductory episode online which you can always refer to. And today I want to welcome my guest. She's a friend of mine for years. She's visiting Miami from New York. Her name is Sloan. She's a beautiful and brilliant woman in her 40s, 50s. I'm not going to say exact age, but that's it.
Leave it at that.
Yeah. So welcome, Sloan.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here with you.
I want to discuss, on both a theoretical and a practical, personal level, these issues of how our sex lives have changed basically right now, in the past like 5 years, and whether we could think of it as revolutionary. So my topics are the way that we have redefined sexuality by going on the dating apps, all the numerous apps that allow us to basically, feel our desire based on like a couple of images, a few little lines, and then the swiping right and left, which fascinates me. The first date, how that works, the first experience of sex, and what really excites me about it, what I find positive in this, is the possibility of separating in a casual way, separating one's emotional life, one's love life, one's lifelong monogamous commitment to a man, separating that whole romantic mythology from sex, from just the experience of, physical pleasure that doesn't have to be weighed down by all these kind of like Disneyfied, mythical requirements, where the man that you sleep with has to be endowed, with. So I know that you've had a little experience with this recently.
It's beginning to. My initial experiences with dating apps were vicarious, of course. It seems to be the way nowadays. So, I mean, I know I've talked to you about this, and I guess I'll say it for everyone. Saul, my husband, and I have been trying to find our way and navigate this new landscape of separating, as you suggest, our romantic and financial connection with our own individual sexuality. And it's a new venture. I would say it's only 6 months or so that we've been on this journey. And what I've learned so far is that language, insofar as we reveal on these texts, I don't know if you've been on these apps, but they allow you to initiate conversation, and they're very female-centric. I mean, the one that sort of is on the rise now is one called Bumble, for which you're receiving no compensation.
Right.
And what attracted me to that one is that it's sold as a woman centric, or the woman is the one who initiates the conversation.
Yes.
So I find that like within this arena, there's a power that is implicit, and I find that it allows for me to articulate demands in this sphere that I would never be able to articulate in the world as we know it, right? Because the parameters of safety have been negotiated by entering this safe space, if you will.
Of the app.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's in the conversations that I've had, I feel that I'm definitely able to request things that I would never be able to request had I met somebody, in the regular IRL. Such as specifically like really being forward about oral sex, and negotiating those terms, like asking straight out, how much do you enjoy oral sex? Which was a question for me. I mean, Saul was, let's say he was not that oral, right? So for many years, I found that my fantasy was mostly oral. And when I looked at porn, that was the big gap,
Interesting.
No pun intended, but there was a paucity of joy being gifted onto the pussy, let's say, by the mouth. I felt that when I saw like oral sex, it was repetitive and not inventive, unless it was like lesbian sex. So I guess I was curious, and I used these apps as a way to kind of investigate, do men really like eating pussy? And again, I'm still in the discovery phase, but this is sort of a criteria that I use to weed out my prospective lovers. And what I have found is that they recoil sometimes. Like you can straight out ask them, you know, how much oral sex are you interested in giving? And they will say things that are utterly surprising to me, like, well, that depends, right?
On what?
On how it's served, was one response.
Which means what?
Which means, I guess, that the conditions of the vagina are sort of on trial, right? And so the feeling, as I investigate more, the sort of feeling that I'm getting is that they're ultimately not that interested in oral sex. Even before they've even met the vagina in question, there are already reservations, and almost like I have the sense that they feel that this isn't something that they're even accustomed to being, asked. I don't know if other women are asking for oral sex that much. I mean, what do you think?
I think it's fascinating because, men are trained to say and do anything to get laid. Right. So if all they have to do is say, yes, absolutely, I'd love to eat you out. When do you want to meet?
Right.
And then while they're doing it, they can get what
back
they
out.
want.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems then that it's because they feel that they're not in control if they're eating out.
Or maybe even through the language.
Of submission.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, also, let's just go back for a second. I mean, we're talking about the dating apps, but just to backtrack for a second, it is fascinating and instructive that so much of porn, I mean, there is so much porn out there, like guys getting fucked by horses, girls getting fucked by their dogs, and etc. Anything you can come up with, it's there. But yes,
are the dogs eating pussy?
The dogs, no, everybody's doing, anal or or vaginal. That's it. I mean, if it's the guy who's been fucked, it's anal. But if it's the girl, it's usually both. But no, nobody is, well, I'm sure there must be some where they're sucking the animal. But my point is, there is very little video of actually just oral. A man going down on a woman and the woman squirting, coming voluminously into his mouth. And that being the name of the porn. So you can like put what you want,
right,
and that big category pops up. No,
there's no oral squirting genre, I don't think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet it's so common and familiar to us in our own sex lives, which, we think of as pretty heteronormative. We don't do any real wild or crazy things at all. So 90% of what's in porn are things that we wouldn't do, but we definitely come squirt, on the mouths or faces of like the men who are eating us out, and we love doing that. So to us, that's the climax, that's the highlight, right, of like normative sex, but it's not out there in the pornography, so there must be some stigma.
I'll say this. Okay, now we're on to squirting. I'll say we've slipped on down. Just to put a pin on that for a second and go back to the language, I do think something that you mentioned is interesting, and I hadn't thought of it, where the seductive texting, right? You would think that they would be completely, forthcoming and even falsely promising. But I hadn't thought of that. Even in the language stage, they're unwilling to relinquish that power, which I guess maybe that's what we're kind of establishing, that it might be a power because if you think about the porn where they grab the girl's head and, they shove it into the cock, that is a scene that we see very frequently. And the control of the head going up and down, I feel that that's definitely a domination gesture. And so to be on their knees and have their head between our legs is kind of the depth of submission for them, I would imagine. It's utterly surprising to me. And I'm still on this journey investigating and like, do men really like to eat pussy? I don't know the answer. I know some women love to suck dick. And I've had conversations. So have you had conversations where women, extol the delights?
Right, but I'm 100% sure what women love about the practice of blowjob is the power trip. I have no doubt. I have friends who have given like 1,200 blowjobs. So, and we've had endless conversations about this, including, and most of them have ended up with like jaw lock, issues, psychological effects of this. But I know that their pleasure, their high, was in the power that during that experience of whatever few minutes, the man was just paralyzed and under their control. So it wasn't that they were coming. It wasn't a sexual pleasure for them so much as a psychological pleasure. It's a little like, the Weinsteins in the world who get high more from the conquest, the idea that they submitted you to their will, however briefly, than the actual sexual pleasure. That's why he's been accused of oral rape by a number of women. I'm going to say like a handful of women at least, which, to you and me is kind of surprising. What's his pleasure from that? So I think that that's what it is. It's a power trip.
Well, if that's the case, then why would men who supposedly are more interested in power and having power over women, why is it that they're not jumping on the oral sex wagon? It seems there's something counterintuitive there, because they clearly must know that is what we like the best.
Right, they know it by now for sure.
They know, all right?
Yeah, that was
the word is out,
the first
right?
wave of feminism established that.
Right. So why is it that women are willing to take the reins on the power trip and take the cock in their mouth, and men aren't willing to? A man who can give a woman oral pleasure is a king, because it's much harder to do that than it is for a woman to give a blowjob. So why are men not taking pride in their prowess? It's just a mystery to me,
Well, I think that there are. I know men who are, and I know men who will say the first thing they'll say is, "Oh, I'm really good at eating pussy."
And are they?
Yes. Or I have a friend who's like, "I have a forked tongue." They're feminist men. They're definitely what's now called woke men in that sense. So they are liberated.
I don't think they're on Bumble.
They're probably not on Bumble.
Well, he of the forked tongue, was that a mutilation? Did he do
just
that?
Born that way.
Demonic skills. Okay, and then so
Bumble.
Yeah, so I think so there are a couple of things. So the men seem to be unwilling to submit verbally, and as far as the reality, when I sense this resistance, they don't get a date, right? The ones who are promising to be amazing at oral sex, they get the date. And yes, they deliver, right? But what I have found is that pretty quickly, after 3 or 4 dates, it becomes, it's sort of like now that they've conquered, they kind of forget to go down unless it's like a 69 situation.
Interesting.
Right. So the pleasure for pleasure's sake of, cunnilingus kind of goes by the wayside. So I'm still looking for a partner who really can enjoy and truly have hunger and desire for it, for everything. I don't want to feel like it's something that they're doing in order to necessarily just watch the results or to feel the power. I want someone who enjoys it, who enjoys all of it. And I don't know. I have never met a man who really, truly, truly enjoys it.
Well, I think that, there are men definitely who fetishize eating pussy, and that's all they want. And I'm actually going to have one on the program in a couple of weeks. And they feel the opposite, meaning they feel that their young and pretty girlfriends want them to be in charge and always want them to do everything and will not actively take initiative and, let's say, sit on their faces, make it what they want, and grind hard and dominate them. But it may be that those men are not on Bumble or Harmony or Match or Tinder. And that's something that is interesting to, discuss a little more, because I think that those apps are frequented by hunters, by sexual predators. And by that, I mean, they identify themselves as, active sexual hunters or questers or searchers. So they are willing to make the profile, put themselves out there. They go from that place of the I, the letter I, the kind of strong male I am ready, pick me, take me. So it requires a certain personality, a less nuanced or less sensitive personality, for at least for a man. How did you experience sexting before you met the date? Once you swiped, whichever way is right, whichever way is a yes, and then you initiate the sex.
Well, I'm still swiping in the wrong direction because I'm so new at it. Okay, so I found that men are very happily willing to jump right into it, which that was very pleasing to me. But I do find that in my situation, where my experiment is to completely compartmentalize the romance with the sex, I found it really difficult to keep men on track, just talk about sex. They want to bring in the romance because I think that's what they're programmed. They think that's what we want. So I'm kind of in a situation where I'm trying to deprogram men.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's not that successful, or rather I still haven't found somebody who's willing to play the game 100%.
Right. Well, I mean, you are in a sense in a good place because you're still married to Saul and you want to keep the marriage together for the sake of your sons and
for the sake of my
households, finances.
And also, let's face it, I mean, Saul and I have been together for so long, really have
life together.
A great life with him. So the sex is separate. And I will let you know if it ever gets confusing. But so far, I've been able to keep it separate.
Yeah, because with him, you're family. But after however many years it is, 25 or something.
Especially, I made
sex
the
gets
mistake.
old.
Yeah, and I made the mistake of hiring a young live-in. So
yeah, the story for
another
our
time.
Listeners
Yes.
is that Saul first misbehaved with the maid, kind of shook you up hard, broke your heart.
Well, on both, yes, because it was a betrayal on both sides.
Mm-hmm. But then
Liberated me.
Liberated you.
Right?
Because
suddenly it's like, well,
you earned the right
yes,
to do it yourself.
Right.
And better. In an informed, conscious way. You know, not with a maid, because you can't help yourself. There is like young, vagina around. But in a way that's now agreed upon. So both you and your husband have agreed on this. And I do think that it's liberated and beautifully conscious to actually say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to save our relationship. The years that we've invested into being together, knowing each other's backgrounds, histories, families, quirks, feelings, being basically not only a couple, but like brother, sister, family. That union, we're going to preserve it. And our need for, sexual adventure, now that the kids are out of the house, they're in college, we are going to separate it from, like the search for love and a mate. That's not what it is. It's just about wanting to feel sexually alive again at this stage in our lives before we, suddenly feel old. And that's all it is, just kind of like experience your body with all the knowledge of that you've earned by living in a new way. So what you're saying to me is that a lot of the partners that you meet on the apps at some point would like to, like, let's say, call you their girlfriend or take you out to dinner or do all those other little rituals.
Right. Exactly.
And you don't want to, because that's soul's territory.
That's right. And it's frankly a turnoff. Because it doesn't fit in with the narrative that I've constructed. You say something that makes me sort of become aware that my sort of liberation, if you want to call it that, is coinciding with a particular moment in women's...
In the culture, yeah.
Right, in the culture, right? And part of why it's so important for me to keep things separate is because maybe there is a possibility, right? Maybe I can juggle even that. Maybe I can have a full-blown romance and a marriage. But I think what's important for me is, as you said, consciously to reclaim what I felt that I surrendered in the marriage.
Yes.
So for me, really drawing out all of the terms, the contract is very hard and fast. It's not negotiable for me. And so in a way, sometimes I think it's maybe arbitrary. I'm not sure. But some of my bullet points of my needs, and I think of it as a sort of a job application. Do you eat pussy? Like these sort of attributes that I'm looking for are really non-negotiable. And I think that now that I'm speaking with you and we are kind of stepping back and looking at it in this sort of cultural context, that's something I think I'd like to talk about as well, because I'm maybe becoming aware of that at this moment.
So what are the bullet points?
Well, the bullet points are that they can't know anything about me, first of all. They cannot ask anything about where I live, who is my husband, who are my boys, where they go to school. There's no private information at all. And then also that they have to spend money on me, and that I will spend no money.
Interesting.
So in that sense, it's a kind of a parallel to my married life. But that's partly out of respect for Saul, because I don't think he should be spending money on, my dates.
Interesting.
And he actually asked me not to. So that's something that I've given him. I've acquiesced in that because I agree.
So you meet them, so they book a hotel room or a motel room, they pay for that?
Well, they usually have apartments in the city, or even in Brooklyn I've gone. But also, we have the Southampton house. So, and I'm, Saul gives me all of the freedom in the world. So on the weekends, I will have somebody drive up and meet me there. Even some of the I have a local guy in Southampton as well. I was actually a caretaker of a property, quite young. But I feel that not spending money, and then I don't mind if it's not, like, they don't need to take me to a lavish, place. If we're meeting in the city, it doesn't have to be like a lavish hotel. It just has to be something that they take the initiative and sort of treat me like their side hoe. Like, I want to be treated like I am their secret as well. And I think that somebody who's willing to go there in the fantasy sense is a kind of person I'm looking for, because then they can protect my own privacy.
So you don't want them to tell you how they spend their day,
Not
what
at
they
all.
did at work, and
no.
what their kids are.
Gross.
Great.
Those are the details that kill kill sexuality in a marriage.
Exactly.
I've been down that road.
Exactly.
The less I know, the better. It's all about chemistry. And it is literally all about what happens in bed.
Yeah,
or not in bed.
Pheromones and that openness, yeah.
Which is amazing, because now it opens me up to a whole smorgasbord of men that are not dateable for me.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I can date the caretaker of Southampton. I don't have to worry about where he went to school or where his prospects are. Where is he going with his life? Nada. You can compartmentalize, exactly. Just keep it to the sex. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is what men have done for a long time. And, not quite openly. Now it's much more open, in part because of these, dating apps and the way that we can meet men without, having to be introduced at the dinner party, with your husband present or whatnot. Yeah, the anonymity of the internet.
Yes.
That's one of the perks.
Well, and if you ask me if I feel sort of patriarchally entitled or sort of masculine because I have this ability to compartmentalize, I want to say yes. I want to say that there's a kind of rush to be the one to draw the lines, right? Because
it is empowering.
Yeah, it is. And I'm not sure if that makes me feel sexy or not, because I like to be a woman and I like submission, but it makes me feel more in control of this fine line that I'm trying to walk. So it doesn't make me feel more sexy. It just makes me feel safer, which, is something that, you and I have talked about, that my sexuality is really tied into feeling cared for and financially cared for. So I come from a generation of sort of growing up on this idea of a 50s housewife was attractive to me. I still had enough access to the TV shows that, I still had that paradigm was still available to me. It's been snuffed. And I don't think our girls have any concept of what that even meant, to be just a housewife. What's that? But for me, it was very much alive. And it was the way that I was sexualized, I guess. So it's always been part of my fantasy to sort of wear the house coat and, have the slippers waiting for your husband. And, and Saul wanted somebody like that.
Now, remind me again, you met Saul soon after college? Or you didn't actually join you didn't pursue a career, right?
Well, I mean, I did have jobs, but I wouldn't say that my aspirations were ever career oriented. And then, I got pregnant, early, when I was 26. So it was...
Right, that's very early.
Yeah, it was just the right time for me to be able to say, okay, I don't have to go down that career path.
Yeah.
Choice has been made. And fortunate that Saul, has done very well. And
so you went to Smith, just for our audience, and then went back to the city and got jobs here and there,
Right.
met Sol, got pregnant,
Right.
got married.
Yeah. And met Sol the old-fashioned way by being introduced by a friend.
Oh, nice.
Dinner party.
Blind date or
Perfect.
something.
Yeah. Dinner party.
Nice.
Yes. So my plan was coming to fruition until I found him in the bathtub with the maid, and things blew up. But I kind of like where I am.
Yeah.
If it's an era of discovery for me.
It's interesting. I just want to pause for a second. I do have at least 2 more friends who have had the exact same experience, where they realized their husbands were cheating or having an affair, minor, not a grand love story. And they have said to me that the marriage is stronger because they overcame it and stayed together, but they also have like separate sex lives, and have found peace and happiness that way, because it has allowed them to stay in the marriage and feel stronger together and focus on the children, and not have that sense of threat, of divorce, and understand each other's limits, define themselves as free sexual beings, but then committed emotional beings, or committed, spouses. So it is a choice that I think is happening right now. It's not so, widely advertised because it's outside the paradigm.
It threatens marriage, and we all know how sanctified that is.
Exactly.
Well, it's interesting you say that. All of your friends, including myself, this was set off by an infidelity of the male. So when I hear that, I think, oh, well, this is a retaliatory condition, right? I would love to hear a story where a woman came to this arrangement consciously, and she initiated it. Actually, there's a short Netflix series called Wanderlust with Toni Collette, and she plays a psychologist. And she actually is the one who initiates it. She and her husband both admit that they've just, been unfaithful. And she proposes a plan where they sort of go and do their own thing, and it follows them through the expected complications that ensue. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to, perhaps people will come to you now and share their stories, but I'm interested to know of women who, perhaps it was the other way around. They were the ones, because I certainly didn't give myself license to do this. It sort of took the man to take the first move. And again, I think that's sort of part of my path, is a sort of, although right now it sounds like I'm a sort of empowered position in a way, it's in almost a submission as well.
Yeah. Interestingly, the women I know who had affairs ended up leaving their husbands and siding with the new men, breaking up the family of both. Sometimes the new man was also married, so he got a divorce and the woman got a divorce, and they coupled up and joined their kids at least half the time. So it feels like, when I look at it within my social universe, the men have historically been allowed to have affairs. So like our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation, among in my circle, a lot of whom are European transplants, their fathers or the grandfathers had affairs. It was kept quiet. It was understood that the wife was the powerful one.
Big house, little house.
Right. So they would never break up the family. Their commitment was to their family unit. Their wife was even more empowered by their infidelities, but she didn't, at least officially, to anyone's knowledge, reciprocate. If she did, it was totally hidden because they don't know. So in our generation, we women, especially those of us who are daughters or granddaughters of cheating husbands, are able to find a way to accept the infidelity of the husband, of the man, because it's something that was done, and we find our power within it, by earning our right to have an independent sexual life officially. And in that way, like through that little crack in the wall, we earn our sexual independence within the couple, which I think is important. But when the woman is the one who breaks the vows and has an affair, I think that it's much harder for her to go back to the husband and say, let's just renegotiate our marital contract so that we can both be free sexually. And most of the time she feels that it can only be justified by her embracing that entire system of romantic love and faithfulness and monogamy once again with the new husband. So she has to break up the first family and
build another one.
Build another family. So she stays with like the, acceptable
right. To
concept.
Be virtuous.
The narrative that we agree is virtuous.
Right, because then she's not shamed. If she begins anew and sets up another love.
Right. She's now the wife once again. She's not like the adulteress, the letter Scarlet A.
I don't know. I mean, I would throw this back at you. You know much more about other cultures. Is there a culture where an adulterous woman would not be shamed?
No, none. No.
Or was there a time?
Well, I feel that, there were times when women were allowed to take lovers because they were extremely rich and came from noble, landowning families, enterprises, I would call them. But those are, exceptions. So there would be maybe like a handful among millions. So I think that that's why we are in patriarchy. The system, the moral system, the religion, it all puts us in that place of being owned, of being chattel. We belong to our fathers, whose name we carry and whom we represent in the world. And then the father passes us on to the husband, whose name we take on, and then we represent him in the world. So our virtue, which means our sexlessness, is their honor. But it's not fair and equal. They don't take our name, and their behavior out in the world does not speak on us or besmirch us. So let's say we're married to a rich and important man and he goes out and has an affair. That doesn't necessarily shame us in the eyes of the world because it's considered a little more normal.
Well, was Hillary shamed by her husband's actions?
Well, she didn't seem to. I mean, she stayed married to him and she, wanted to be president and bring him back in the White House as the first husband. So she didn't act as if she were shamed. And the fact that this was a 21-year-old intern makes it even more problematic because of the, power, extreme, power difference between them. So it's not even that he was having an affair with, the wife of a common friend of another politician, which, or the daughter even of
that would have been more threatening. That there would have been more shame attached to that. I mean, that kind of
Well, he was actually. I'm not going to name it here, but we all know who else he was sleeping with. Besides the women who went out in the open, he was sleeping with wives and he was sleeping with daughters of fellow politicians that we know of, but they kept it quiet.
Right, but the real public scandal did not bring shame upon her. In fact, I think she was lauded for
Hillary.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. As sort of like a champion of loyalty. That's my perception.
Yes, well, within that, I'm interested in the fact that most of the sex advice, sex counselors, sex therapists, out there, famous or neighborhood ones, work to keep the marriage intact. Their basic aim is stay together, find a way to work through it. So the sanctity of marriage, as it has been handed down to us through the generations, is still very important. And there isn't a very clear place for women to be alone, unmarried her whole life, single her whole life, who is not lesbian. I mean, we're always talking within the heteronormative population. So
yeah, you're an outlier.
I'm an outlier.
Yes.
Yeah, I have not been able to be. I was so traumatized by my father. Not that he was unusual in any way. I mean, I think, he was pretty average in his expectations of me, but it just shocked me so much that I could never have a man call me his wife. I just had an issue. I could not belong like that. I found the loss of agency, completely, claustrophobic and debilitating. But since the advent of the Me Too movement, I have come to realize that this I that has been so important to me, I choose, I am the way I am, is actually male in gender. So it takes us back to what you were saying about being able to speak in the male initiative in your sexting and in your first dates through the apps. I really think that that's all we have is the male pronoun.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, tell me more about that, because I've heard you say before that the language that we speak is a patriarchal language. And that, for some reason, comes as, it doesn't exactly align with my feeling, my instincts. Can you explain to me what you mean by that?
Well, this is the irony of it, that the words that I have at my disposal are all male words. So my understanding of it is that patriarchy, which is basically the society we know, and I don't call it patriarchy in a negative sense, it's just the way that it has been built up. The society as we know it has been created in part to protect men from women, to protect civilization from the wild sexual power of women, who are the generators, the procreators, the birthers. So we have that magic of nature, and there is culture built on nature in order to control it. So I think that all the words that we have, which is the history that's been written, these words that we use now in every language, not just English, are based on the legal system and inheritance system, business and enterprise, morality, religion, that enables patriarchy, the society that we all live in. So their job is to create meaning within that system. All of our words are very limited because there's such vast compromises. We pick on some sound and some sign of letters, alphabet, a few words or a few letters, and we try to squeeze all the nuances of our own personal depth through them in order to translate ourselves, both to ourselves within the system and to the one we're speaking to. So they're already extremely limiting for both men and women. But I feel that they are within that system that supports male supremacy. And I say that with reservation because I feel that men are equally victimized by it. But
by the very constraints of the language that they created.
And by patriarchy.
Mm. Yeah. Well, it's good that you're a writer because you can, that's the project, right?
That's the project.
To reclaim the language, right? So going into this idea that men are afraid of our magic, right? this brings me back to the idea that maybe what they fear about surrendering to the pussy is the fear of our magic. Because it's really different to impale the vagina than to open your mouth to it, right? Isn't that sort of where evil spirits can enter? It's a vulnerable space, right?
Yes.
And I had an encounter on one of my dates, and I thought, this might be evidence to support this theory. I had my period, which I'm still young enough to have, and I sort of opened my legs and expected the regular procedure to ensue, and I was met with horror.
So this was a man you had been with before?
Yes. And the horror manifested into disgust.
No way.
Mm-hmm. And basically he said, I don't want to go there. And I was like, why? And he said, because it's usually not as pleasant, it doesn't smell as good, it doesn't taste as good. And I was like, well, try it out. And so he proceeded to, I had the sense that we had sort of worked through it and he was game and,
So he ate you out
Yeah.
and you came?
He did,
While
yeah.
And you
Yeah.
weren't menstruating heavily? Or,
No, it was very
I
lightly.
would imagine.
Yeah. It's very light. And I figure, well, you don't have to go and put your mouth in the hole and drink it. There's all this other area on the top.
Exactly.
There's the clit. There's all these other details to attend to that you don't need to interact with the blood that much, So I figured that it was something more profound than just encountering blood.
Like the smell or the taste, which is minimal.
Yeah, and I'm starting to think that there's a correlation between their feeling afraid of maybe putting their mouth on the source of our power. I mean, what moment better is this? What better sign of our fertility than the menstruation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to confront the bloody vagina is to really look straight on to the woman's superiority.
Mm-hmm. An
As a
egg-making
human.
machine.
Yeah. And so I wonder what you think of that. If you think that maybe the fear of our reproductive power might be the reason why men don't like to eat pussy as much as they should.
Well, I think that definitely originally it was that fear. The fear that women are in charge of the reproduction of the species. The notion that a man could not be sure if that's his child. He had no way of knowing other than owning the woman and keeping her tight in his stable, in his harem, and not letting her out of his sight, let's say. Also, the way that, the way that female sexuality is built by nature, it's pretty endless. The female orgasm is kind of unending and unlike male orgasm. So the way that nature designed it, we are in heat. When we're in heat, like any other species, when we're turned on, one guy comes, we pick one mate, there is the agency. We, in nature, by nature, we are the ones who choose. So we choose the one.
It seems like animals have figured out this consent business better than we humans have.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had originally, I'm going to assume, but we've put all of these limitations on it. So the way we're designed, the woman picks the man based on
His
attributes.
plumage.
Right, his plumage. Yeah. And they have sex to the best of his ability. He comes. Ideally, they come together.
Mm-hmm.
But once he ejaculates his full load in her, he passes out. I mean, by nature, men like fall asleep after. That's it. They're done. We're just
Activated.
getting started. Yeah, we're just activated.
Yeah.
So out in nature, like in the forest, we come and we scream. So the men in the area who hear our screams, like other animals, realize that there is a woman in heat there, and they come close. And when the first guy falls asleep, we get to pick the next guy.
Do birds sing when they orgasm?
I
Do
don't know
female
about
birds sing?
I don't know, my dear.
Wait, do monkeys scream? The female monkeys like,
I know
yes!
I know that this is definitely true for us, for our physical, sexual, anatomical makeup, because I've read on it extensively. I'm not an expert on the other
baboons.
species. But I only know like dogs and cats because I've had them. And they definitely do this. The cats for sure do it. They start like, giving out all these signs, and then the male cats come.
Right, they do before, but during.
During that, inseparable. I mean, I've had both dogs and cats. During the sex, you cannot take them apart. Until the
female
boy,
dog...
until the male ejaculates in the female. Then, but this doesn't end, at least in cats and dogs. The only species that I've lived with, almost all my life, so I am familiar with their ways. The female calling for sex doesn't end until she's pregnant. When she's pregnant, it all stops. Then she has the baby.
So it's not contingent on the orgasm. It's pregnancy.
Right. So she can take, and that's how we're built. We're supposed to just have all the men, one after the other. We're getting more and more aroused, more and more turned on, and the best, most potent little swimmer, sperm of all these men actually gets the egg fertilized. Then we have a fetus, and we can relax. And then everything kind of shifts because we have that child. But that doesn't work for patriarchy because they don't know whose baby that is. So in that setup, that natural world, civilization world, we get to name the children. They're all our children, the women's children. There is no father, whatever, So what patriarchy has done is kind of rearrange the system so the men have to know that it's their kid. They have a way to know that that's their child, name it, and then pay for it, support it. And from there, we've got to the recent divorce laws, which I think kind of undo a lot of the advantage that men had earned. Because they have to pay, a lot of money.
I'm aware.
For those
Why
children.
do you think I have my freedom?
Exactly.
So I was like, just do what you want.
Don't sue for divorce. Don't go to a lawyer.
Do cats have orgasms?
Oh, I don't
Do
know.
females?
They sure sound like it, but I haven't read up on it, and they sound like it though. Definitely.
I know
They keep
nothing
you
about
up.
the animal world orgasm, but I'm sure we can learn a lot from them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that I understand what you're saying about language being patriarchal in the sense that, perhaps I would understand it better if you said that it was, that language was devised to separate the haves and the have-nots, right? Like it's a power strategy.
Well, language is the beginning of history, the beginning of civilization, period. In the beginning, there was logos. Logos. Before logos, there is chaos. There is chaos, disorder, nature.
Right.
And then there is logos, which is also God, meaning creation, cosmogony, how God enters into our understanding of life and the world is through language.
Without language, there is no God.
There's no story.
Mm-mm.
So without the generation story, we're back to, what Logos calls chaos.
Right. So
we don't know if it's chaos, but that's how it's been presented.
Right. And the lack of chaos is control, is the assertion of control, is keeping chaos and keeping wildness at bay.
Mm-hmm.
And who are the wild ones? The women.
We are.
The women have to be tamed.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Because we got this thing that men don't, baby making.
Yes.
And it's kind of unfair. So nature is on our side, culture is on their side, and that's the balance.
Mm-hmm.
And now that, here we are, it's the 21st century. I think that we can take sex back.
Through technology.
Through words, speak sex, find ways to take our sexual power back, because no matter what else it has done, the culture has not managed to control and articulate it. Like, we have words for everything we do until we enter the bedroom, and then the lights are off, and the guys are supposed to kind of know what they do. And that's the heteronormative average, right? So we now, as kind of like more liberated and aware women, are trying to say what we want. That's what you're doing by sexting, by asking these questions. You're putting it in words. Are you ready to do this?
Mm-hmm.
And you can also say what you don't want,
right?
If there is such a thing. I don't know.
But, it's interesting if we want to talk about pillow talk or, dirty talk in the actual bed, right? So we're talking about the pre-negotiation, which, by the way, the powers of language on the woman's, sexuality is enormous. I have a friend who says, like, the woman's sexual organ is the brain, which I don't agree with that.
Me neither. But it's a Roland Barthes quote. The sexual organ is the ear.
I think
I hear and I obey. That's the essay by Roland Barthes.
Well, interesting, because she's co-opted it to have nothing to do with obeyance, but to have to do with being titillated, sort of being, sort of auditioning a man, right? Like sort of a more control position where he has to be, he has to be funny, he has to be intelligent. And I find those things not only to be the case when you're pursuing someone as a mate, but I don't find those things to be the case when you're pursuing a lover.
A boy toy.
If
also,
you will.
Right. I just like the word toy.
Yeah. Yeah, toy is interesting because the toy doesn't play back though, right? So okay, so the man who is in the role of sharing this sexual space with me, I have the sense that after the language games of sexting, once we're in bed, I'm not interested in negotiating. Like I don't feel like I should have to say, well, do this and don't do that. I like all of that negotiation to happen physically. Does that make sense? So I guess maybe I'm unusual in the sense that I don't feel like I have to say, or I want to say, will you please do this? I feel like if I have to do too much talking in the bed, then it's not good. I'm looking for an animal understanding.
So you're talking theoretically
Yes.
in advance.
Yes.
By sexting, by asking these questions. Do you like to eat pussy? Do you like someone to come in your mouth, etc., etc.?
Right.
Do you like fisting or fisting the girl, being fisted, whatever the questions are? And then once you meet, you
don't want to talk.
Want to feel like you're just swept away by this physical passion.
Right. That's interesting because it is a feeling. It is a fantasy. I want to fall into it and not have to do the work of creating it again. I feel like I've done the work, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, pillow talk is not something that is part of my vocabulary,
And that's partly because, as you said, within the sex space, you like to be submissive.
Right. Right.
So it's not your sexual job to, give orders.
Yeah, exactly. Right. But then, so language does have incredible power in the text form, and I think it has more power than the language that you and I are sharing right now, the oral language. The phone is a very charged space, and there's nothing as erotic than receiving a text.
A sext.
A sext. I mean, this has been a complete, like, new level, almost it's become a legitimate form of foreplay. And the power of seeing the words written. I mean, you as a writer can understand this. And I don't think ever before has the written word been so potent as an erotic trigger.
Right. True. Because it is thanks to the intimacy of the iPhone, which is so close to us. And so even you could be aroused and moved to masturbation and orgasm, self-orgasm, simply by receiving texts from someone you haven't met. And you don't even have to meet them, and the words themselves can get you to come, make yourself come, without any other connection.
Powerful.
So that's,
And that's more disassociation, right? It's like an even further remove. So we're just cutting apart and compartmentalizing our sexual lives, I think, more than ever because of this phone technology.
Right. But ideally, we're going to restructure them and put them back together anew,
right.
Ideally.
And that's the only way to do it, right, is to break it apart into these little pieces and reassemble.
Exactly, yeah. I do wonder, and this is a slightly new topic, how our children, Generation Z, are handling it. I was hoping...
I call them Generation Me.
Okay, I like that better. So, I was thinking when my daughter was a child that she is going to be just an adamant feminist, because from her toddler years, I
She's
raised
your
her,
daughter.
right,
Yeah.
to be aware of word choice, of, the gaze, the male speech, expectations, cliches. I always pointed everything out. Plus, my walls are full of female sexuality-based art, and my bookshelves are full of that type of literature and essay work. So, when she was already in first year of middle school, I said, just to be clear, if anyone asks you for a blowjob, they have to eat you out first.
Nice. Yeah.
And I squeezed that in before she knew what it meant.
Beautiful.
Because I knew that later she wouldn't be interested in my input.
Mm-hmm. How old was she when you started this indoctrination?
School, like first year of middle school. But anyway, yes, she's aware, and she's definitely in a position of power with her boyfriend and in her relationships, but it is limited. And, I have found that generation is not any different from ours.
It's incredible. Well, the fact that you had to articulate that is astonishing in and of itself, right?
Right.
You would think, again, that a boy would use that as like, let's pass go. Let's get her going.
Exactly.
Like the fact
they
that,
don't.
like, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that they have more access to porn, and that the porn industry hasn't caught up with our so-called enlightened Me Too,
They get their sexual education from porn, for sure, online.
Right, and the boys are the ones who are seeking the education.
Right.
So what's the antidote? Yeah, I mean, I think females need to make porn. And I love what you did with your daughter. I think that's a move to say, okay, it's, should be obvious, but you first. Because we all know that you expect that from me,
Yeah, women definitely, there should be more, porn made by women. There should be more sex guides written specifically for this generation. I, I think that what they call, I mean, my daughter calls it rape culture. I think that that's like one of their terms that they use in everyday speech without quite understanding what it says. But in what is called rape culture, meaning the culture defined by the Me Too movement as a culture in which men in positions of power feel, enabled to harass or not quite, rape, but, objectify and sexually assault perhaps, women who are in positions of weakness, especially in the work environment. That culture is very familiar to our kids. They think that it's basically the norm out there and that they have to always be aware. So they are in a sexually defensive place, both the boys and the girls.
Well, I worry about my boys. I mean, at
Right.
any moment, a girl could accuse them. And then, our Pascal and I have just been lately, I think we probably came late in the game to this, because you kind of don't think that your son is going to be a perpetrator of this, right? But recently, in the last couple of, maybe, how long has this been going on? What's the
2 years, I'm going to say.
2 years? And what do you think set it off? It's the mostly the Weinstein incident, right?
I think the Weinstein made it mainstream.
Yeah. So we have been, we've talked to them about it, but I mean, I'd like to think that we've just raised them in a way to think that they can't take what's not theirs, or kind of raise them to think that it's kind of not cool to not seduce. Like, seduction is a power trip, right? So
And earning permission.
yeah, and it's
Earning the consent, yeah.
and having boys who are athletic also, I feel that I'm hoping that they, in hindsight, there could have been more that I could have done, but I'm hoping that they can equate seduction to scoring, right? Scoring shouldn't be tricking a girl or dropping something in her drink. It should be something that you earn. And, as a woman who likes to be seduced, and I'm attracted to men who have sort of, I guess, the power, and I'm attracted to that, I'm hoping that my boys will have sort of by osmosis taken in those values.
Yeah.
But I mean, I am sometimes worried to say that I'm worried for them, because that, I feel like I can't say that because feminists are going to be mad at me, because how dare I think about the boy perspective? They don't get to have a voice. Now it's only about the women. And if you bring up any degree of nuance, you get shamed. Like, I've been shamed for saying things like, oh, it's not always, you can't always believe the girl.
Right. It's not really always, right and wrong, so clearly defined. And the idea that we should err on the side of the women because for so long we did not.
It's dangerous.
Is not fair. Right. I agree. It makes no difference. I feel that we cannot inform our current judgment by what happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago, because it's just not fair to our children, most of all. And I remember that article in Rolling Stone. Remember that whole scandal where
the boy was falsely accused.
Right, and this woman writer basically built her career on the story of this girl, which turned out to be untrue. And I mean, it almost brought down the magazine. It was just a huge lack of fact checking, because everyone down the chain of command made the assumption that the girl would not lie, because she's the victim. How could anyone lie and say she was gang raped when she wasn't? So, and then like the Duke lacrosse team, I think, and so there have been cases that actually disempower female truth because of false accusations. So it doesn't matter if it's, the girls in Salem, Massachusetts, saying that, there are witches out there, or if it's today's girls, blaming boys for robbing them of agency. We have to stay objective and on the side of truth and thorough, and not assume that, because women are physically weaker, they are, the weaker or the victim sex, because we're not. And it's not what we should fight for as feminists. I don't want to fight for my right to always be right, or my right to be the weaker gender or the victim gender. Not at all. I in a sense, I feel that I want to fight for my right to be the stronger gender, the gender that can understand and empathize and forgive and, embrace and nurture, because that's how the species moves on and evolves. That's how the consciousness of boys and girls is improved.
I don't envy people who are raising younger kids now. I mean, I know my job's not done, but they're in college, and it's tough. And I think that the Me Too movement, first of all, talk about language. Like, the name of Me Too is problematic, right? Because it's talking about alliances, and it kind of is just tapping into a rage culture and mob mentality.
Yes.
So it's not just me. This idea of aligning yourself with another victim. There's a domino effect. Everybody holding hands together, and it creates a false fury, right? And I think as a mother of boys, and as somebody who has a very complicated relationship with feminism, I feel outside of it, and I feel alienated, and it's sort of the same thing that's happening, with the extreme left, and which is another subject, but the sort of policing of political correctness. But I think that the Me Too movement is really suffering from, it's got its blinders on in a way that is really damaging to sexuality, right? Not just power, but like bedroom sexuality. Because I mean, can you imagine like what boys in college are? I don't like to think about it, but can you imagine what they're up against? I think it's going to create a culture of puritanism and suppression.
Yes, I think it has already.
Yeah. I think these kids don't seem as sexually charged as certainly we were when we were teenagers.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that the 60s, we weren't born in the 60s, but we were kind of elevated and energized, by the 60s. So I know that I think we've discussed this before, when I first came to America and I was 15, the first week, the kids I had met at the high school in LA, and I had come from a Greek island. So there I am in the high school in LA a week later, and they took me to see Rocky Horror Picture Show. And it completely changed my consciousness of everything. I was in that movie theater, reborn.
You were Janet.
Yes. I was Janet, and I was, reborn in the sense of I reevaluated everything. I started from scratch, redefining, my understanding of all values. It was lucky for me that all of this was happening in a language that was not my native language, in a place that was so different from the place I had been at until then.
You were in Transylvania.
Right. I was in Transylvania, and I knew that, okay, this is not, this is not the way, Greece was. We have to start all over if we're going to fit in. So I had this kind of like new agency of redefining sexuality, female sexuality, but it was all informed by the 60s, for sure, by that sexual liberation of the 60s and 70s. And it was too bad that AIDS, happened kind of at the same time, and it, limited everything just as I was experiencing it. And I do feel, historically speaking, that, AIDS brought the first, return of Puritanism to that culture.
And I think Me Too is the second one.
Of the 60s, yeah. And feminism was limiting both first wave and Me Too, definitely. They do bring back that inherent Protestant American Puritanism, which we don't have.
The sanctification of marriage, of virtuosity. In order for women to be safe now, they must be virtuous.
Right, and the fear of the other and the fear of the gray area. This kind of like American tendency to simplify, things that cannot be simplified at all. I do think that regarding the Me Too movement, there is a backlash that we are experiencing in the presidency of Trump, for example, a backlash against political correctness and against, a kind of liberalism that seems fanatical. So people like you, in a sense, and I know that you didn't, I don't mean politically, who don't feel quite embraced by these liberal, Me Too, feminist new definitions, because they are housewives or for whatever other reason, find themselves without an allegiance, without a political home.
Exactly.
And there were a lot of protest votes or lack of votes in the last election, in 2016. A lot of people who stayed home or, voted for a third party or whatever because they didn't feel included. So here we are,
marginalized
by our own side. Yeah.
Our team.
Our team. Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a quick break for a minute and we'll be right back. Welcome to Speak Sex. I'm Eve Eurydice, your host. I have my friend Sloan with me here in Miami today. Sloan is from New York. We've been talking about sex, women, and the language of our sexuality nowadays. So I do have a couple of thoughts that I want to run by you, a couple of topics. One is the transactional aspect of our sexuality. You did say that you feel turned on when a man spends money on you, when a man will, get a hotel room where you will meet, and so this, what I call, provider sex, is something that does excite you. I want to.
I've never heard that term, provider sex.
Right. So my term, I coined it. It means that instead of selecting the man who is, the most muscular and can protect us physically best, or the man whose pheromones and chemistry are more familiar to us or seem to complement our own tribal, being best, we have learned to choose the man who would be the best provider for our children, even when it comes to men who we know for sure we will not procreate with. We're done with our procreating.
For sure. There's that residual provider lust, if you will. I like that.
Right. Yeah.
I would agree. I mean, I think that having already found my baby daddy, I still can't deprogram myself to not be physically turned on by the signs of the capacity to provide for me. And that doesn't have to be financial. It could be somebody who takes charge, because that, I think, is part of what the cave woman in me wants. Somebody who can arrange. I don't want to be the one to arrange the date. I just want to show up and have the magic be created for me. I want a storyteller, somebody who's going to narrate, and I want to submit to the story. And if I like the story, I'll come back.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm interested in this because in the process of creating a sexual language, and hopefully creating a new female-oriented sexual language to implement where there was none. It's interesting to me where the provider or transactional or romantic sex ends and the actual sexual act begins. At which point this language gets implemented, not the language of seduction and romance and kind of like showing male prowess through, material prestige, but the actual one-on-one, naked, in the flesh, in semi-darkness language. How we see that, whether or not we name it in the act, doesn't matter as much is the fact that we can name it and we practice naming it either before or after or during. And I came to this because I wrote this book, Satiric on USA, about all the different sexual scenes that I could get entry into in America. I traveled for like 3 years around the country, and I, hung out and lived and met and, ate and lived with all kinds of different subcultures. I was with cross-dressers, and I was with like sexual cutters and a lot of different BDSM, S&M subgroups, as well as celibates, priests. It's a wide range. I didn't write about all of them. I wrote about a couple of dozen, but I found in the process that they had all come up with extremely detailed terminology.
So envious of them.
Of everything they did. and they have like the cutest, most inventive terms for power exchange, for fantasy roles, for sexual acts, and we in the heteronormative world have none. So they actually get to negotiate and take that for granted. That they're not going to enter sexual space without extensive negotiation, because of course when there is extreme power exchange or physical pain, they need the safe words, and they need the limits, the soft limits, the hard limits. They need to discuss in advance. This is how far we can go. This is my safe word A, and my safe word for like hard limit B.
Are these negotiations always based on physical limits? Do they have language as well for emotional barriers?
Well, I think that they do, in the sense that a lot of their hard limits are based on emotional experiences,
like trauma,
right? Childhood trauma or something like that. So they will say, I cannot, I don't like this practice because it reminds me of whatever childhood abuse, or an ex-boyfriend invalidation, or some other PTSD thing that I have. So in that sense, yes, it's not only like your pain tolerance, but your psychological, stability or adjustment.
Yeah, and now that these things are more part of the mainstream culture, we heteros, you've known this because you embedded yourself, but people like me who are just regular old heteronormative people are now seeing the poverty of our own language, and again, I feel alienated again because these subcultures have got it figured out. And any kind of hetero negotiation, you kind of are inventing a language and nobody else speaks it.
Right. Well, they had to, they, unlike what they call vanilla relationships, they had to define their sexuality from the beginning, because, they're in the context, for example, of a dungeon. So to make sure that what is about to happen is not assault and it's not torture, they have to very consciously, define it with words, and these contracts that they discuss. So they have extensive boundary assurances. They have aftercare conversation, so they know after the sex play, the sex exchange, the sex scene is over, who treats whom, how.
You mean in terms of wound care?
Wound care, but also actively what you do. For example, do you unbind if there is, if someone is bound? Do you unbind them? Do you give them 10 minutes to come back to non-sexual space? Do you use certain words of, intimacy to reassert that you care, you empathize, that you're not a dom, but you are a partner. You switch out of dom space and you get into, do you use nicknames? Depends on, it also depends a lot on the type of play. Like there is the MDLG, mommy, dad, dom, little girl. Or there is the little person, big person exchange.
So these are preset roles.
Characters, yeah.
Characters.
Right.
They're archetypal characters
exactly.
that strangers can fit into.
Well, yeah, there is age play. So that's the CGL or DDLG. That's just an example, right? I mean, there are like, they also do like the whole sugar baby part, but not in lifestyle, only in the sex play. So, sugar baby as a lifestyle is actually...
What is sugar baby?
Well, as a lifestyle, it's actually slightly more popular these days among the young girls.
Oh, to be
where
kept.
they're
Okay.
kept by an older man, and they like to idealize it. They have conventions. They figure out how you can do it, etc. But that's different from the actual sex play, in which you don't engage in any of it until you enter the sex space, and then you use certain words. So you live out your sexual fantasy basically. But in order to do that, you negotiate first, and you say, these are the words that turn me on, and this is the part that I want you to be in. So like for us, for more heteronormative people, for example, it would be like doing a costume sex scene. So like, let's say, let's dress as a French maid, and then you will say, call me Mr. and I will call you, my pet, or I will, whatever, call you Matilda, and you call me sir. I don't know, but that's how you negotiate.
I think the Matilda is a hard limit, the unsexiest name possible. So wait, do you find that hetero language accommodates this kind of play? Do we have anything that's set? Because I'm hearing this and I'm thinking, to be honest, it sounds a little limiting. It sounds a little boring to me to have these pre-assigned roles in a way, because we don't have these set games. I feel like there's much more imagination that is available to heterosexual sex, because we don't have a language, so we can start from ground zero and just invent something.
Right. Well, that's kind of my idea here, but I do find inspiration in these sexual subcultures, because I kind of learned from them. For example, service submission. So I, as a feminist, I don't like cooking dinner for guys, and I don't like, doing chores, and I just don't, because I feel like it robs me of whatever power I have in this world. But I would do it if I was like naked or in a see-through cat suit, and it was part of like a sexual exchange, and like I was turning them on while I was doing it, because then it would arouse me, because it would be in quotes. It would be a conscious choice instead of like what I'm doing because I have to, because they expect me to like service them. But if I'm doing it as part of sexual pleasure, and it's in one-off, meaning that's not how we always have sex, but it's just a play, I would totally be up for it, to experience it, and I think it would excite me. Objectifying myself, wearing like a little something or other, whatever we would come up with to accommodate that scene. So that's what I'm saying, that if we take something out of the context of daily life and sexualize it and make it a conscious sexual practice, it becomes more interesting, and also it becomes more egalitarian, because then we can reverse roles again within the sex, and having the guy do that part and try out and see how that feels. So it's a way to use sex to try out social role modeling in that space. I've like in vanilla relationships, in a sense, we're always vying for power. We're trying to find our place in the dynamic, and at least, for myself, how much power am I giving away? How much power am I getting? Like you, I like to feel that at some point the man is worshiping me, but that is part of the power exchange, right?
Is sex always about power?
I think so. I think that's how it's set up. I mean, not at the moment of orgasm, no. So there is a moment within the sex when we forget who we are, and all of that evaporates, and we're just two bodies, and then we're not even ourselves, right? You don't even remember who you are, and you're just
because our
pleasure.
Notions of ourselves are always defined by power.
Yeah. So when we reach the moment when we're no longer ourselves, we're free from all of that. And I think that's the ultimate beauty and power of sex, is to get to that
To
space.
get to that space. But you think it takes these negotiations in order to free ourselves?
Complex negotiations, yeah.
Yeah.
And also in order to not repeat ourselves to drudgery.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so when you're 19, maybe you don't need that many negotiations because a lot of things are still new.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, 10 years later or 20 years later, when you want to experience, you want to continue to experience new dynamics, negotiating becomes much more important, after your life experience, so that you can, understand your own limitations and stretch them out and expand them.
Would you say that this always falls under the realm of fantasy play?
No, I think fantasy play is just one of the ways to enter it. I mean, I think that there are numerous sexual accidents, good sexual accidents, happy ones that we can get into by being open to trying new things and not just repeating what we think works or what we know our bodies do best, because we change, we change all the time. Our bodies change. Mm-hmm. The things that we do at the gym or when we work out change, or how our body responds
and each
to things.
Partner is going to elicit a different set of movements.
Exactly. But also we change our minds about things. Like, what we think about a certain issue, we get to change our minds again and again. And so I think that sexually too, we are meant to do that. So if we just kind of consciously are open to change within sex and not that repetition that we assume is safer, but it's not.
What you're speaking of, this ability to change and reinvent yourself, I think the bedroom is now the site of the greatest transformations, which is why we're hearing so much about transgenderism and identity, gender identities, and think that now what you're saying makes perfect sense to explain the way that our actions in the bedroom and our fantasies in the bedroom can be the source of our own reinvention, because it is kind of the sort of last space that we have to change our minds.
Yeah. And so long as there is a sense of structure, which is where this kind of negotiation or speaking sex comes in at the beginning, then you can break it all down and put it back together again and build yourself up stronger or slightly altered, discover desires that you had kept repressed.
Yes.
Just for the sake of fitting in with the mob, So, like, the sexual subcultures, they will do like sensual deprivation, they will do... well, you're kept in darkness, or you're kept so you can't hear, or blindfold, or anyone or more than one, of the five senses are suppressed. And how do you feel during sex when they are taken away? Because it puts more emphasis on the sexual pleasure. Or, they do pet play. They do, kink that has they have different types of risk awareness.
What is pet play?
Dehumanizing. Pet play is when one wants to be the pet of the other, so you take care of your kitty or your puppy. And again, it's a lot about trust. Like the other, the owner of the pet, makes all the decisions and all the choices, and you just feel like you just stare at your owner and you're taken care of. So the pleasure is kind of giving up the self
When
completely.
You just looked at me like that, I kind of felt it. I'm going to give you a biscuit.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And what was the other one you said after pet play?
I don't know, but there are many. There's needle play and knife play and scarring, and I don't remember which one. There's full bondage, where again, for example, full bondage to me is like a meditation. It's a meditative practice if one tries it out, because you have to keep stillness, you have to keep still space, and when you do it, the best way to do it is find that place in your mind where you can be completely still and not be you as your kids, or speaking of pets, your dogs know you.
A loss
Kind
of
of-
self.
Right. You go kind of like more out of body, and it's a way to keep your mind still while your lover binds you, which takes a long time. People don't realize that, but it's easily, 15 minutes of stillness, and you can play music, but you don't have to. You can just be, meditating into becoming whatever it is that you're imagining you being. So the binding and the unbinding are both very ritualistic, and they're focused on the body, and they change the look of the naked body into something new.
Sculptural.
Right, yeah. So all of this kind of like abandonment of self and sacrifice or loss of agency is erotic if it's your choice. So that's what I'm saying. Or we're talking about, choosing to give it up, and choosing how you give it up, and for how long, and to whom, and why, and when. All of that is part of this, like, speaking sex and articulating what you want or what you fantasize. And you may find out that you don't like it, and you don't do it again.
It's interesting. Men could really, if they knew this, they could get anything they want. They could get you to clean their house. They only framed it
Right.
with the language.
Right. Yeah.
So these are
Yeah.
so. I would.
For
love
example,
to
there is a
hear-
fetish called rape play.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Mhm.
I can see how that would be appealing to a woman as well, who would willingly submit to that.
Yeah, especially a woman who, for example, has been raised in a strict religious
To abandon
household.
that.
Right. So it's not her fault. Right.
I'm sure it would take the fun out for a real rapist, though.
Yeah. No, I don't know. No. Yeah, I can empathize with a real rapist. But
we can hope that this could be what you're suggesting, what you're trying to build, this language of negotiation, really could be a kind of antidote to a lot of the wayward desires of men.
right.
Because if they feel empowered by their ability to have a woman submit, and there are very many women who willingly submit,
Exactly.
I
So
would have to say that
if they just speak it
yeah,
and engage verbally in
Yeah.
this foreplay,
use your words,
Use
like we
your-
tell our kids.
right, yeah. And instead of, the other thing is we have all these new words about narcissists, for instance, which are very accurate, but like the love bombing, which is followed by the hoovering and the gaslighting and the discarding and all of that. So during the love bombing, all the effort they put.
What is love bombing?
Love bombing is when they gain they woo you,
Okay.
they court you, and they gain your trust and your faith, not by earning it, but by bombing you with all the cliches of romance. You're the only one for me, I will die without you. The moment I saw you, blah, 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 blah. All the stuff you read in like
things
a
aren't
romance
true.
novel. Well, they say them, though. They can say them, and they work. And then when they're done, they move on. So instead of using that kind of cliche, boring language, they could just use the sex language, the speaking of sex language, which will be more honest.
Cut the middleman, and
Right.
yeah,
And then you don't have to feel bad about yourself, and you don't have to like gaslight somebody or ghost them or whatever it is. You just have the sex that you've discussed. So, yeah, I mean, honesty is a huge part of it. Giving permission and finding permission to speak truth, which isn't easy. Between the two genders about sex, it isn't as easy as it seems.
Well, it's
we
not-
feel like we should please the other instead. Say what they want us to say. And don't do that, just speak truth instead.
Well, when you start to discuss, you run the risk of turning yourself off as well. It's a great risk. You can push the other person off, or maybe even yourself, because we have all been sort of taught as women to like the love bomb. And when we say that we don't want the love bomb, like my, particular practice, it opens up a lot of doubts about what you do want. And you have to sort of rediscover for yourself.
Exactly. Well, that's why it's kind of retraining our consciousness,
Right.
because
It is
we
consciousness training.
Right, it is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of opening new neural pathways. So,
Yeah.
We've read the romance novels,
Right.
we watched the Disney movies as kids, and we formed our understanding of what hurts, what's rejection, and what's reward.
And what turns us on.
Right. So Cinderella and Belle and Ariel, all that, it was imprinted. We understood those tropes. We have to relearn all that, like get rid of what, is really fake, and bring in the truth in its place. And by practicing it, we're going to open up new
Pathways.
ways of understanding it. Yeah, mentally. It's all in our minds and our consciousness.
Right. So we can literally tell ourselves what turns us on.
Right.
I don't know how many more kids are going to be watching Sleeping Beauty and Snow White now that we've realized that it's rape.
Yeah. I think a lot.
I think it's time for new fairy tales.
Exactly. It's
New
time
porn.
for new everything. Yeah. Well, so hopefully we will find ways to do it by talking about it. And this is why we're here today. So thank you for coming.
It's been super fun.
I know. I loved it. Come back,
Yeah,
please.
I will. It's too cold in New York City.
Yeah. It's the time to be in Miami.
For sure.
And thank you everyone for listening. This was another episode of Speak Sex. I'm Eurydice, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye.